recognize the member from Vancouver Fairview.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'd like to speak to the motion to amend the bill and to speak in favour of it and to talk to the issue particularly around the perception of the bill, the speed with which it's being introduced, its potential impact, whether that's perceptual or real, and the need, because of the very special place that parks and protected areas play in the consciousness of British Columbians, to actually treat this issue very seriously. I'm going to start from a couple of premises. First of all, as we all know, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, there were significant, sometimes almost paralyzing public battles around the establishment of many parks and protected areas in this province. Not all, but we know very well that we went through difficult times of conflict as the people of British Columbia, those focused on protecting the environment and establishing parks and protected areas and meeting the provisions of the Brundtland Report, and those who just thought that the only priority for a British Columbia government should be the creation of more development, more extraction, and more jobs, struggled through roundtables, through the Commission on Resources and the Environment regional tables, through land and resource management planning, to find the formula in which the economy of British Columbia was built on a sound and lasting environment for the future. Because I hope that we all know that it's not a question really of balancing the economy and the environment, but of understanding that without protecting our environment, without protecting biodiversity, without protecting ecosystems, our economy will ultimately fall apart, or will simply be ultimately sometime in the future based on remediation and repair of the damage that we've done, but nothing that actually productively enhances the life of British Columbians. So these were difficult times. They were difficult arguments and struggles. British Columbia went through those. They're not entirely over, but we don't need, actually, in my view, to revisit them unnecessarily. And sometimes these conflicts are revisited not so much on facts, but on perceptions, because, as my colleague from Vancouver West End has stated, we simply haven't taken the time to explain, to listen, to consult, and to amend where it's advisable. Because I think the minister, members opposite would agree that none of us, as wise as we may deem ourselves to be, none of us comes up with a perfect answer the first time, every time. And where things can be improved to meet the interests of the public, we should strive to do that. The second principle that's important to me is the fact that British Columbia is touted by all of us and by our government, and that's why so many people immigrate to British Columbia from across Canada, from across North America, from across the globe. We pride ourselves on beautiful BC, the iconic nature of British Columbia, and it's not just an image or our own provincial pride. It's true. British Columbia is home to the greatest diversity of species in Canada. It's home to a very distinct and different ecosystems, all of which are inhabited by multiple species, some of whom are at risk, some of whom are thriving, all of whom can be threatened by development that doesn't pay attention to the careful management of environmental values, the cumulative nature of impacts on the environment, and also, particularly in an era of climate change, the necessity to ensure that we maintain the ability for species to adapt. We mitigate climate change, but we also know it's ongoing and we must adapt. We have to provide for corridors and pathways. This is very complex science, and it's becoming more complex because there are many unknowns. So when we talk about BCs and British Columbians and people who come here, their attachment to the iconic nature of British Columbia, our parks, our protected areas, our wild spaces, we know it's real, and we know that BC is a very special place. We know that almost 90% of British Columbians have used a provincial park at some time, and we know that about 6 in 10 residents of British Columbia use a provincial park every year. Now, I've listened carefully to the minister. I've I've listened to her react to some of the statements from my colleague, the member for Vancouver West End. I've heard her respond about some of the misperceptions of what the implications of the Act may be. I've looked at the Act. I don't necessarily agree with her, but more time to look at the Act, not just by me and my colleagues, but by the many people around British Columbia, the many advocates for the environment and parks who've communicated with the government, who've communicated to our environment critic, who've spoken out publicly in the media about their concerns of the Act, need to be addressed and need to be heard if we are going to proceed in British Columbia with economic development. Now, I will note that the minister opposite may say, and the government may say, that we campaigned strongly on a development platform in the last election, and that's true. And I would argue that we also, on this side of the House, talked clearly about the kind of jobs and the vision for jobs and the economy we had in British Columbia. So I know that it would be futile for me to say to the minister opposite, through you, Honourable Speaker, that this wasn't mentioned. The issues of development were not mentioned in the last election. But certainly, Honourable Speaker, the issue of, as the minister characterized it a moment ago, we are in a rush. There will be damage if we don't move these amendments to the Park Act, because more damage can be done. Were not evident during the election campaign. It was not, to my knowledge, in the platform that this bill would come forward, because it was needed on an urgent and emergent basis. This is news to me, and it's news to the advocates for the environment and the park system throughout British Columbia. So I would argue again, even if, as the minister states, this is an urgent issue and that the bill actually will help protect some areas that are in parks, I don't believe, Honourable Speaker, that passing this amendment to consult more broadly, to ensure that British Columbians understand fully the implications of the bill as presented by the minister, whether or not she is right that other aspects of the Act, other parts of the Act, and other aspects of this bill provide the protection that people are seeking. It's true, if people understand that to be the case, then they may change their mind. They may still oppose the bill, but the government may feel it's consulted and it's made or not made, whatever changes are recommended by people or amendments, but at least a fulsome process will have been carried out. The minister stated that we know on this side of the House, Honourable Speaker, that you can't consult on a bill before it's tabled in the legislature, but with full respect to the minister, through you, Honourable Speaker, the minister who was in the House moments ago responsible for natural gas development has spoken often about consulting with proponents of the natural gas industry as the process proceeds to develop a regulatory and tax and royalty regime around the natural gas industry. I'm not suggesting that he's actually floating a future bill by them, but certainly consultations by his own admission, and I would say he has taken great pride in talking about meeting people to consult about the industry and the development of a royalty and tax regime that will be competitive, were a source of pride to him and his government. So with respect, Honourable Speaker, I simply reject the minister's statement that it was impossible to talk about this bill before it was tabled, to consult about this bill before it was tabled, to talk about the need for the bill or the purpose and impact of the bill potentially. I think it was possible to do so, and I certainly think it's possible to do so now. Honourable Speaker, I share many of the concerns that were raised by my colleague from Vancouver West End. I would argue that this bill probably does reduce protections for small parks. I think the minister and the ministry have stated that it simply creates the same level of protection for all parks, but there's two ways to do that, as we all know. We could create a higher level of protection for all parks, or we could create a lower level of protection for those parks that had previously enjoyed a higher level. And I would simply say that this aspect of the bill, to me and to many, appears to lessen protections, lessen requirements for ensuring that any activity in a park is consistent with with the highest values of biodiversity and protection of the environment and protection of park values, and I do not think that this bill does that. I remain to be convinced, but I do not think that, and neither do many people who have communicated with the minister, with the government, with the premier, and with our environment critic, myself, and others on this side of the House believe that. In fact, I would argue that smaller parks require a greater degree of sensitivity because the area in which any potential damage may be mitigated is that much smaller. Sometimes they are small parks because they are very unique and contain ecosystems that are in fact more fragile. I would say that the ministry states that the range of activities included within research will be left up to a statutory decision maker who is delegated decision-making authority by the minister. However, the minister can override any decision. Honourable Speaker, to me, that does not sound like fully including in an act of this legislature the kind of clarity, specificity, and protections that the people of British Columbia would seek with respect to their parks. This legislation, Honourable Speaker, has implications in many ways. Many parks and protected areas could, in fact, notwithstanding the comments of the minister, be impacted to accommodate pipelines, transmission lines, resource roads, or any other number of industrial developments. And let me simply say, Honourable Speaker, that it was not that long ago that the proponents of the Pacific Trails natural gas pipeline were found to be trespassing for the purposes of research and exploration within park boundaries, and they were told explicitly that they should not do that, they could not do that, they were not allowed to do that, and they should get out of the park. And I have to ask myself, Honourable Speaker, because many advocates for the environment have asked this question, could that be at the root of this bill? To expedite the ability of proponents of gas pipelines or other pipelines or resource extraction and development to simply operate and do their exploration within the park boundary. It certainly appears to me to be the case. Let me simply say, Honourable Speaker, as I attempt to wrap up here, that if in fact this proposed bill will increase protections for the environment, for parks, will make the process better, then let us take the time to consult with the many British Columbians and environmental advocates who believe otherwise, and frankly believe otherwise very strongly. This government has taken the time to consult on many things. This is not a matter where one should pick and choose which issues. When we're dealing with something as substantive as changing the nature of how we protect our parks in the future, how changes are made to activity within parks, the whole process of changing park boundaries and allowing research and potentially exploration under the guise of research, we should approach this very carefully. It may be at the end of the consultation process, even if this side of the House and the independents oppose the bill, that the government will carry the day. But it will not hurt the process. It will not endanger either development or environmental protection in British Columbia if this government heeds the call of many advocates and many citizens because of the iconic nature of parks and the importance of parks and protected areas in protecting our whole web of biodiversity, to take the time to consult and get it right. You may reject the advice, but it will never hurt you to take the advice. And I do not believe that the time left in the sitting of this House is adequate. Let me simply close by reading some opinions, strongly held opinions by advocates for the environment. From the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society of BC, from the Executive Director, Nikki Hill, what the government must understand is that these protected areas, no matter what the size, form part of a well thought out pattern of land use designations, often the result of long, multi-stakeholder processes that achieved a balance between a diversity of interests. Other parks were established following decades-long battles to protect wilderness and wildlife from serious harm for the benefit of everyone. They're designed to protect unique features, sensitive species, and irreplaceable values. To open up these parks is to open up these battles, Honourable Speaker, and will result in serious uncertainty regarding land use planning in the province. Our province will become a very risky place to invest in. These changes threaten to undermine the entire concept of a park and render it a meaningless designation, an area protected only until you want to exploit it. We call upon the BC government to reconsider these changes and to respect the integrity of the Parks Act and the protected areas that it defends. Honourable Speaker, what Ms. Hill is saying very strongly is that parks cannot be considered in isolation. We can't take a park that was established in relation to other parks, in relation to the overarching web of biodiversity and ecosystems in this province, the interrelationship, the migration corridors, and say, if we take this park out, we'll simply replace it with something else. It does not work that way in the world of natural systems, Honourable Speaker. And what the other thing that Ms. Hill is saying is, we went through a period of great battles around resources, environment, parks, and protected areas. We do not need to revisit that. If, in fact, we want to ensure that we allow certain types of development that may be appropriate and allow them within the context of ensuring that environmental values are protected and that ecosystems are protected, let's take the time to consult broadly. Let's ensure that we don't leave it to policy, which, as my colleague from Vancouver West End has said, can be changed at a stroke of a pen. Let's ensure, listening to British Columbians and advocates, that we're very, very, very specific in the Act. My colleague from Vancouver Quilchena will know that there are many rich lawyers because legislation or laws have been drafted without the necessary specificity, that they cannot, in fact, be misinterpreted. We need to get it right. We need to be specific. Let me also briefly quote from Valerie Langer of Forest Ethics Solutions. Many people will remember Ms. Langer as one of the people who was instrumental.
Some significant leeway, but on the amendment, and if you can tie the quote to the amendment.
I can. I think the tying of the quotes is the strongly held beliefs by advocates that this legislation is flawed, and I would argue, the minister has said, Honourable Speaker, that she intends to consult. I am arguing on behalf of the amendment that more time is needed, that if we do not consult more broadly and heed the call for consultation of the many strong advocates supported by hundreds of thousands of British Columbians on an annual and monthly basis, financially, by volunteer labor and others, we will exacerbate a situation that will not lend itself to certainty for investors in British Columbia and will defeat the purpose of the Act. Ms. Langer has said, you can bet that when government is about to pass legislation that would affect particular industry sectors, they have a conversation with those industrial sectors first, and that is exactly my point with respect to the Minister for Natural Gas Development. At the very least, the province should be consulting with the environmental movement who helped establish all of the parks. We request that this not go through second reading and that the ministry sit down and talk through the implications of any changes to the Parks Act with the community who has been primary in establishing planning for protected areas. Honourable Speaker, two more brief quotes in the same vein. This one from a lawyer, Andrew Gage of West Coast Environmental Law, who says, there's a certain conflict of interest in allowing industry, albeit with government permission, to trash a part of a park in the name of research when they want to see that land removed from the park. Bill 4 seems to be premised on the idea park protection unreasonably constrains government and industry. Honourable Speaker, if that is not the government's intent, and that is not the intent of the bill, then the government needs to sit down with people who honestly believe it is and consult with them and achieve some form of social license with respect to this proposal. Finally, Honourable Speaker, from Stephanie Goodwin, Greenpeace BC Director, the proposed changes would undermine decisions based on science, international commitments, and best outcome possible negotiations. British Columbia is proud of its parks and we should expect to see the public vigorously defending these areas from any threats. Greenpeace last week asked the minister not to move forward with these changes and to convene a discussion about strengthening the Parks Act. Honourable Speaker, in closing, I would like to point out that a couple of weeks ago, the Minister of Natural Resource Operations stood in this House and justifiably spoke with pride about the decade-long process that led to agreements in the Great Bear Rainforest that balanced conservation with extraction and processing of resources. I'm proud of that as well, Honourable Speaker, because I had a small role to play in that as Executive Director of one of the key organizations. Sometimes these things take time. That is our point, Honourable Speaker, and through you, I would ask the Minister to respectfully consider our suggestion that in this case, more consultation and more time is not a bad thing for the government's purposes. It is a good thing. It, at the very minimum, will allow people to believe they've been thoroughly heard, and it may well lead to some productive changes to the legislation that will work better for everyone: industry, government, environmental and parks advocates, ecosystems, species, and the province as a whole. Thank you very much.